but I'm getting ready to start driving again. So hang on a second. Let me see if I can figure this out. How is everybody?
Yeah, good. Probably not me for the
Good.
hosting because
All
it's
right.
3 in the morning and I
sorry?
got to keep it printed in.
It's
Probably not me.
All right. So does that make hang on. Mute. Does that make Norris the host? I just muted you, Norris. I'm going to make you the host, and then I will unmute you because I don't know how I did that, but I did. Bear with me 1 second. Okay. Come on. It is not. Can you unmute you?
Yes.
Oh, there you go. Okay, good.
I'm going to remute. I'll remute.
You will remute. Okay. And then I'm going to turn my camera off. So it's 3 in the morning. This must be the hardest call for you. Is that true?
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge, but we're good to go.
Okay. Good. I'm going to turn my GPS off so that I don't talk through the GPS. And I will. I'm going to talk about some of the things around the delegation model, but not a whole lot. And then I will just turn it over to all of you. So if that does that work? I can't see you nodding your heads because I'm off camera. So I'm going to assume you're nodding your heads in agreement. How's that?
Yeah, it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah. Yes.
All right.
Yes,
Well,
yes,
thank
there.
you. It's there. Great. You let me know when you're ready to start. Okay. So the question today will be, who or how did you get introduced to ESHIP Summit and ecosystem building? Okay. Does that work? And I will, I'm going to get in my car. I'm going to start driving as we get more people on board. So, although if it's just the 3 of us, then we'll just solve all the problems of the world and call it good. I have to tell you, I just spoke with a person in Pennsylvania, and it was disheartening because she spent a lot of time putting together a lot of work around giving out a report on how the state could come together and catalyze and support innovation and entrepreneurship. And people won't look at it, like people won't talk about it. Hello, Hassan. Hassan, are you not on your way?
Hi.
Hi. Are you not?
To where?
Are you not coming to San Antonio?
Oh no, tomorrow morning.
Oh, okay. All right, fine. Be that way. I will.
No.
I'll see you in San Antonio tomorrow. All right.
I can change my plans and come tonight.
You can. I'm sure there are places for you to stay. But I'm on my way, and Faye is already there. So you'll have company. Enoch is coming in tomorrow, and Danny Brewer I just talked to this morning, and he's coming in tonight. So
Oh, nice.
Whatever you follow your energy. But yeah, anyway, so I was just mentioning, so I spoke with this woman who compiled a whole bunch of stuff. So I'm going to invite her to the Slack channel and have her share out with everyone. And I think the biggest thing that we can do for her right now is to let her know that she's not alone. She's not bananas. She's what she's worked on is valuable, and and because I don't think that she feels that right now, and that's a shame. So I'm sure that all of you have had frustrations on how you work at stuff, and you're doing this for the betterment um, of the community as a whole. For her at this point, it's the whole state of Pennsylvania, and it's fallen on kind of deaf ears. So
I feel like I just joined the 12-step program for ecosystem builders.
I feel like sometimes I feel like that's about right. Maybe we need something like that. Like, I'm an ecosystem builder, and
Hi,
yeah.
I'm Norris. I'm an ecosystem builder. I haven't connected anybody for an hour.
Oh, the next shirt after ecosystem building is a team sport is ecosystem building is a state of being. So I feel like that's definitely the case. All right.
What was the other one that we heard? The woohoo one? I can't remember what that was.
Ecosystem building, it's woohoo.
Yeah.
That's something else. I think that's more of a personal conversation around
Okay.
some people that we work around, or work with. All right. So I'm going to for the people that are on the call, because I'm curious to hear from all of you. So the popcorn question is, how did you get interested or involved in the ESHIP Summit or ecosystem building? Like, who introduced you? How did you get introduced? And I will popcorn too. I feel like I know Norris's answer, maybe. So I will pick on Norris.
I'm not sure I know the answer. My earliest memory was the first time I ever heard the phrase entrepreneurial ecosystem was got to be about might have even been before the year 2000. And there was this argument of whether that was a good metaphor or not, or it just sounds cool because it's alliterative. And there was and it was one of those conversations that it was an academic setting, and it just got so into the weeds on the minutia that they all just sort of lost track of the whole thing. That I've been involved in sort of economic entrepreneurship oriented economic development really back all the way to grad school, where we're using student teams to work with not just local businesses, but working with economic development projects. Way back in the day, the U.S. Small Business Administration used to give universities $250 for every project they did with that supported the small business community. That's not a lot of money. We did 48. We got paid for 40 a year, and 10,000 in unrestricted money. As Chad will tell you, it's like 100,000 in money with strings on it, especially to your dean. So it was an interest, but we had enough students that we were doing 60 plus projects. So we got to do all sorts of interesting stuff in economic development. I did that at Montana State, and again at Boise State, we really amped it up pretty dramatically. That in terms of ESHIP, I really am. I can't tell you where I sort of first. I've been involved with Kauffman Foundation stuff since about 2000, on and off. So I was just sort of in the loop, and someone said, get your butt to Kansas City, basically. So I said, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, whatever it was. But I think like a lot of people, it's an evolutionary thing. And I'm just really grateful that I was paying attention when they told me to get my butt to Kansas City that first year. So let me throw the ball to, we were speaking of Pennsylvania, how about Beth Zimmer?
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Beth.
Thank you, Norris. So I was introduced to the entrepreneurial ecosystem building function when I didn't know that it was called that, when I was working to convince an angel investing network to expand their operations up into northwestern Pennsylvania from Pittsburgh. And the reason for me doing that at the time was I was a business development executive in talent acquisition for a an HR firm. And in my brilliant mind, I thought, if we have angels investing in our startups, then they're going to scale a lot faster and create a lot more jobs, and that means more business for everybody, right? So the Angel Investor Network expanded up into Erie, and the Erie, Pennsylvania angel investors were coming together and investing in all kinds of really cool startups. But the issue was none of them were from Erie. So about $4 to $5 million in a 3-year period of Erie money went outside of the market. And I realized because of that, that's what prompted me to dig deeper and realize that our entrepreneurial ecosystem was extremely underdeveloped. And so my career trajectory changed very quickly to focusing on entrepreneurial ecosystem development, et cetera, et cetera. And one of those things that we were able to attract to town as well was the Co-Starters program, and building a relationship with Enoch and that team is what actually introduced me to Kansas City and the ESHIP Summit. And I don't know who to popcorn to because I can't see who's on. So can somebody pick for me?
Brigitte?
Yeah, thank you. Let's see. So I'm fairly new to this actually compared to most of you here. But in 2018, I attended the big Omaha conference in Omaha, and currently at that time, Carlos, who was an ESHIP champion, I met him, and he introduced me to Celia, who happened to be in Tulsa, just 2 hours away from Ada, Oklahoma. And Celia actually spoke at my conference here in Ada, and we all got to learn about ESHIP and ecosystem building. So that was my introduction. I'll pass to you, Hassan.
So I was involved in economic development work in and around Detroit, starting in around 2009. And a lot of it was cross-sector, multi-stakeholder initiatives. And so my role in that was I worked on developing projects that were around developing talent pipelines, entrepreneur and small business development projects. And probably about maybe 6 years ago, I started to use, my role was always in bringing together coalitions and convening people around some of the projects that I was involved in. And I didn't use the term ecosystem builder, and I didn't know that that was what I was doing. And probably about 6 or 7 years ago, I started to use the word ecosystem to describe what we were doing. And I remember at some meetings with a lot of traditional economic development folks, people would always tell me not to use that word. I wasn't using ecosystem builder, but just even using the word ecosystem. Some people didn't know what I was referring to, and some people would tell me not to use that word. And then 3 years ago, I got an invitation to attend the first ESHIP summit, and I got that invitation through work through Christopher Gergen from Forward Cities, around some of the work that we had done in 2014 with Forward Cities in Detroit. So once the first ESHIP summit came around, I got an invitation from Christopher to attend, and I think there were probably, I think it went out to quite a few people, but I think from Detroit, I think maybe myself and maybe one other person or two other people attended. But I didn't start using the term ecosystem builder until the first ESHIP summit. And I think Chad is the only one that hasn't gone yet.
Cool, thanks, Hassan. Great question, fascinating journey. So I started running Fire Station 101 back in 2015, the Innovation Hub, not really thinking it was economic development or even ecosystem building, but really started trying to understand what it was that we were doing. And as part of that understanding, we got a state-funded trip to go to the US on a bit of a tour of San Francisco and Boulder. When I asked around to see where else I should go. A guy by the name of Daniel Johnson from the States said, hey, you got to check out the Kauffman Foundation. I reached out, got in touch with Andy, and Andy told me about the ESHIP Summit, said, hey, maybe you want to come along to this. So I caught up with him, and then a few months later attended the first ESHIP Summit, and it's all just been uphill from there, and then contributing to the studies and whatnot, to the work. So great to be involved. And I think that's it. And I think somebody...
Yeah, Scott
go for it.
Here.
Hey, Scott, go for it.
Yes. So I was doing entrepreneur building with a startup out of the university back in 2006, and was eventually connected to Andy Stoll as well, which is probably where the first piece of ecosystem building came into my vernacular, originally through my friend Colin, who was doing some work in for Kauffman. So I literally just took into my Gmail what was the first time the word ecosystem building or ecosystem leaders is the first time it was referenced back in 2016 by Colin, and that was a connection to Andy.
That's great. All roads lead to Andy. I don't. So I will tell you my origin story, and then I will give you a brief update on where we are for this summit. I had jumped headfirst into entrepreneurship, but not really connected and didn't understand what an ESHIP or ecosystem building was. And I was lead organizer of Wind Marine Cups in Tulsa. And I was invited, like Hassan, to the inaugural ESHIP Summit in 2017. And I thought it was spam because Kauffman actually sends a lot of emails. And so I ignored it for a little bit. And then they're pretty persistent. So I asked around, and there was one other person in the state of Oklahoma that was invited, as far as I know. So the two of us went, and I walked into the room, and there were all these lovely people, my people, and I thought, wow, I don't know what this is, but this is really cool. So that was my introduction as well, and there's nobody else that's new on the call, correct? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. So at this point, we're still planning the summit. Everything is a go, and we're also thinking about what other things could happen. But just so you know, we're still planning on seeing all your lovely faces at the end of June. A kind of a theme that keeps emerging is the fact that you can't do ecosystem building by yourself. Ecosystem building is a team sport, and we need co-collaborators, and we need other partners in crime, and all the wonderful things come out from getting together with people like you, but maybe don't think like you. So the diverse perspectives matter, different points of view, different backgrounds, diversity in general. So with that theme in mind, the subject of today's conversation is about bringing together people that you need to or want to engage with. So a couple of questions I want to start the conversation with is who do you work with in the ecosystem? Like, it's the low hanging fruit, it's the people that you can geek out with whenever, and maybe trying to expand that, like talking about how to get out of that echo chamber and inviting new people in, or how do you engage the people that are part of the ecosystem that don't yet know that they're part of the ecosystem, and around how you would bring them to an event, say like the ESHIP Summit, to say, hey, by the way, Mayor, there's a conference on entrepreneurship that you might want to think about coming to, because this is a thing. But so those are a couple of the conversations I'd like to get going, and I will leave it up to Norris and Chad and whoever else on the Beth on the call to pick a direction and a starting point. If we can get to some best practices or ideas, and you can note those in the agenda, that would be awesome. So I turn it over to you, Norris. Lead the way.
Drive carefully
Thank you.
and wash your hands frequently.
And I will be on the call with you as I drive through Texas.
And if you could mute, please, Cecilia, as well, just because there's a lot of road noise as well.
Great.
Thank you.
So, Jack,
Sorry, Norris, I think she muted you as well. You might just want to unmute yours.
oh, well, I wasn't all that intelligent anyway. It's still Monday morning. Yeah, we had an interesting, a lot of you know Annika Horn, and one of her blog posts is, why not get everybody in the ecosystem together and sort of sort out the turf? And I had posted a link to that, and somebody here locally said they want to do that. Well, actually what they want to do is they're going to assign everybody their turf. This is someone who might be a very odd person to be in a delegation, because there is nothing we can do to change their mind. But what about the people? I'd be interested in talking about who are the people who could be persuaded, could be seduced to the good side of the force. Should we be focusing in these delegations on people who already get it? I know I started recruiting for people from Idaho basically months ago, trying to get people to show up. But should we be mindful about any specific kinds of people we should be really trying to get to this event? And did that question make any damn sense whatsoever?
Yeah, it does. I'll pipe in and interested in others' thoughts as well. One of the things that strikes me, I did a post recently for International Women's Day on the female-focused entrepreneur ecosystem in Australia. And I started getting some of these comments about people saying that there's no support. They've been going for 10 years. They haven't gotten a lot of investment. It's all bad, and nobody cares about female entrepreneurs. And then I looked through some of their LinkedIn profiles, people are commenting, and they have been going for 10, 15 years and just giving it a hard crack. But then when I map out the actual actors in the ecosystem, our innovation hubs and our co-working spaces, our accelerator programs, our angel groups, all these actors, when you look at their establishment dates, particularly in Australia, most of them started around 2014, 2015. Like there's this massive wave. We are part of a phenomenon. A lot of us, I share the sentiment that when I got the email for the ESHIP summit, I did think it was spam, because you think, well, it's, is this really a new thing, or has this been going on for some time? A lot of people have been doing economic development for decades, but this is a new phenomenon we're in. It has been very difficult up to a point, but I also predict there will be a point in 10 years where we're experiencing other challenges, but not this one. Right now, we're just trying to convince people to get it. And there's that great question in the chat: why don't people like the word ecosystem? And I think it is because it's new. There's an education piece. It's a new vernacular, a new way of thinking, a new way of building. So back to the question on are we trying to persuade people that aren't part of the tribe, or are we trying to speak to people that get it and just want to be part of it? I think the answer is a bit of both. But I also think the other thing that's really striking me is that outcomes trump. Like value trumps everything. And so particularly, say, for example, with female entrepreneurs, I think there's going to come a point where there's just so many of them, and the results show that female entrepreneurs are just as good as male entrepreneurs, and there's this big groundswell. It's just the way of being. I think the same thing's going to happen with ecosystem building, where we're just going to be getting the results, and people are going to come along. But there is this tribe building and a lot of this bringing people together that has to happen in the interim. So it is hard. It is a challenge, but I think a lot of the stuff we're doing is just going to be attracting people. And yes, I think we should pursue people on the fringes, but not focus all of our energy on that. And really just focus on getting some of the outcomes. But I'd be interested in other people's perspectives and journeys as well.
Don't everybody talk at once. Srijita, what do you think?
I think it was just interesting to see that everybody had relation or, you know, a background in economic development. And that's why I kind of posed the question, because that's where I work. That's what my organization is. It's an economic development organization. And it sometimes almost feels like there's some resistance to change, but it would be beneficial to have the language in place where it's not necessarily a change in traditional methods, but continuing with those things in just a different mindset. So definitely targeting people who are already doing this, but maybe not, they don't know yet that this is what they're doing. And I was also curious to know, there are some people who actually view this very differently, and how to approach them. For example, I know several people who are, you know, all about the VC, high growth, high tech world, and for them, ecosystem building is a little different. And I wonder how is this language to kind of talk to these kind of people to understand of the more collaboration and mass collaboration aspect of it. Sorry, I asked a question on top of a question.
Beth, since you're hiding on the phone there.
Actually, I'm here now. Can you see me? Hello?
You look fabulous.
Anywho, remind me what the question is. I'm sorry. Anyone remember?
Who should we be looking for people on the fringes, even beyond the fringes, to get them involved in this, or should we focus our attention on people who already get it?
Yeah, I think that's it depends question or answer. It depends on where.
Don't say depends to an older gentleman.
Sorry. Depending on where our communities are, right, in their evolution around economic development and ecosystem building in the first place. I think from my experience and the lessons that I've learned over the last few years are, it needs to come, the invite needs to come from someone that the invitee greatly respects. And at least in my community, if you are not in a position of influence, such as an elected official or some other anointed community leader driving this thing, it takes a lot longer to convince folks that this is necessary. So if, like, for instance, our mayor went to the ESHIP Summit last year. This year, our county executive and her director of our county library system are going to attend. And, you know, short of getting them there so that they can start speaking the language and using the bully pulpit to drive this thing, I think that's where we need to start anyhow, from a Northwest Pennsylvania perspective. And, you know, we did make a lot of impact in the beginning and in the first 3 years in changing our culture to be more focused on entrepreneurship, but we're a long ways still from getting to that holy grail of the ecosystem actually convening and working toward the same goals. So it's a long game. I'm not a patient person. I don't think anyone that's very entrepreneurial is patient. When we can see so clearly what needs to happen and what would our conditions would be once we get there, have the patience to work through this over the next 10 to 20 years is important. I don't know that I'll be able to stick with it that long, but it's just absolutely something I've learned through this experience so far.
Beth, you raise a really interesting point. The video that keeps coming to my mind is that one, I don't know if you guys have seen it, about the dancing, the first follower one, where you get the guy up there just dancing, being a bit crazy. Yeah, and then all of a sudden that first follower comes, everybody comes along, and everybody probably remembers the first follower, that first crazy guy. They probably just think was the first crazy guy, and they'll always think the first crazy guy. And so I think it's kind of us. A couple of things that really come to mind. One of them is the question that Cecilia put at the very beginning, saying, how do we get together with people like us who don't necessarily think like us? So that's a bit of an expansion where we influence a few people that kind of get it, but they have legitimacy. And then I love what you said as far as the invite needs to come from someone respected. I think about my own journey here where I left the system, like I was working for the state government, I was working for local governments. I left everything to go and do this work because I thought if I'm free from the shackles of the institution, I can actually get on with it. But what I found is exactly as you said, I also lost a bit of that legitimacy. So now I'm attached to 2 universities with the Global Entrepreneurship Network. I work with the Kauffman Foundation very intentionally to say, okay, this gives me at least a ticket to the table, but I'm still also know that because of position or personality or whatever, I'm never going to have a certain level. So my job then is to influence people who can then have the conversation. But I think it's also my own personal journey is becoming less and less, and I don't have to be that person having the influence. I need to find the people who can have the influence so I can step back and then go be that wild, crazy guy dancing someplace else in some other community. So it's very much a journey of self as much as others, but I love some of the comments that are coming through. Hassan, I'd also love to hear your thoughts as far as Detroit and kind of what you've experienced on that journey on building that coalition.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, lots of great stuff that I'm hearing on the call. I think I don't think there's any formula on who to approach first or, where the effort should be. I think it's all individual and just based on assessing individual relationships and determining how much effort or how much energy it makes sense at any given time to put into that relationship to help people make that shift. Because definitely, I mean, this requires a lot of patience because it's a long-term game and there's so many dynamics involved. I think the language piece is very important, and I think focusing on common language that resonates as opposed to using like language that's very specific to we ecosystem builders. If you focus on like the key elements of what it is that we do, there's commonality in so many different things. Like I was doing ecosystem building for a long time without even using the words ecosystem building or realizing that that's what I was doing. And I suspect there are a lot of people that are also still doing that every day. But if we go at them with very specific language that they're not familiar with, then it seems totally alien. But if we focus on language that's common language and just focusing on the key elements of what it is that we do and not on the language itself, I think that makes it easier to cross that bridge with certain people. If that makes sense.
It does. That's excellent. One of the things that's coming to mind, and if we take it in this direction, is the concept of multiple narratives and multiple translators. And they're actually 2 different roles in the ecosystem. Some people are the narrative and they can just get out there. And I think we do need people in the skinny jeans, black t-shirts. Let's go and have a hackathon for your ecosystem to pivot and iterate into new directions. All this weird language. But then we also need people that can allow those people to be, but they can be the translators in technical systems. We call them the APIs, that interface between 2 completely disparate systems. And then we also need the people that know the history and the culture and the legacy of pure economic development, university trained or whatever that deep, rich history is. So how do we almost not make people feel bad? And I was thinking about the story that Cecilia said in the very beginning, as far as the woman who's getting burnt out on trying to transform her entire state. How do we equip people to do their role, legitimize their role? Maybe they are just that crazy dancer. Maybe they are crafting the narrative, the storytelling arc within the ESHIP teams is incredible. But then maybe also creating a new role within these new roles of the translators. How do we get people that kind of have a foot in both? Maybe they're not exceptional at either, but they can help bridge that gap. And maybe their job is simply to find the mayor, to find the influencer, and then let them take the limelight as we then all move on to another aspects of the ecosystem just to do our role rather than trying to be everything. I don't know, am I reducing it down too much, or is there
Yeah,
rules?
can I jump in? Who just said that comment? I'm on the phone. Sorry. Who just said
This is Chad.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the more novel concepts that I've heard in the last year about ecosystem building, and actually just such a valuable reflection all the way through. I mean, you have a number of ecosystem builders who actually are very, I truly believe, are just confused inside their role in the ecosystem, and that gives it a ton of clarity. And what I mean by that is you see a number of ecosystem builders who either think they have the same role as an economic development agency or have the same role as venture capitalists, and it truly doesn't fit into that, but they do play a very valuable role in the ecosystem. It's just simply not in those lenses and terms. I mean, towards the question, ESHIP still, like, I leave ESHIP and still say that the major funders in communities are not present at ESHIP. There are many, major gatekeepers who come from family offices, who come from the larger venture capital world, the large corporate, that do play a role in ecosystem building, but are not at ESHIP. And one of the comments back and forth that I've had with Kaufman on that is the excuse of it's very hard to find those individuals and bring them into Kansas City. But the reality is, unless we can talk to those individuals and that translation can occur, it does all ecosystem builders a disservice. So those are just.
That's a great point. I mean, early aughts, Kaufman actually had this sort of presentation on what you should invest in if you want to grow your entrepreneurs. What should you invest in? What shouldn't you invest in? Which kind of led to the who you should and shouldn't be funding. And I think it's probably old enough that probably was overhead slides, not a PowerPoint deck. But there's some value to that. I was just thinking the biggest funders in our community, they're looking for people with legitimacy. They're looking for job titles and fancy letterhead. They're looking for who are the important people, and let's go fund them. And it gets I'm really wondering if we could, we could do a strategy. I'm thinking there are people from those organizations who are already on our recruiting list here to come to Kansas City. Maybe we could figure out some way, a seduction strategy to get more of these, these funders to the event. Because Chad's point about creating value is one way we can create value is we can be guru of metrics for our community. That's my sort of selfish point. What else can we bring expertise to? But if you bring money, you bring resources, you bring local and national attention to your community, that's something where we can build that the legitimacy in the eyes of those folks. I'm thinking of the people I know who use the word ecosystem builder, and they're anything but. No matter how much you stretch our one guy is basically here in Idaho is basically a crook, but he's got ecosystem builder on his LinkedIn profile. Last I checked. I'm thinking how building legitimacy is something we've talked about in all the goals. I'm wondering, can we craft a strategy to get these funding sources here?
I think that's something that Beth and Katie were working on as far as the funding model and the community foundations, and there's some efforts along those. And I know that there's a whole bunch of we've had conversations about the community czars and the ecosystem builders, and I want to get into that in a minute. But before we do that, I would like to invite Scott to put on his other hat, and because he's got a very interesting perspective. Scott, will you share about being a policymaker and how that infuses into your work around ecosystem building? Because that's a unique perspective.
Yeah, so I wear many hats. One was of a serial entrepreneur, but the other hat being of a policymaker. And the advantage that I have as an ecosystem builder is just simply knowing what the lines and the processes are for obtaining money from government sources. For starting block, the large incubation center we ended up building, we ended up using an entirely custom method to do funding for the project off of a land sale. If every single ecosystem builder had that as one tool in their treasure, in their trove of tools to use, you might not use it in every single city, but you would probably find 10 more communities that would start talking about, hey, can we use tax incremental financing to support entrepreneurs? Or can we create a business improvement district dedicated to small businesses and entrepreneurship? And using those terminology and that type of framing, it empowers another entrepreneur or another ecosystem builder to try to say what tool or what lens works well. So, it's more of those lessons that I think become powerful. And unfortunately, I will watch dozens of times of an entrepreneur, of an ecosystem builder trying to either fight up or come into conflict with city government for a certain desire, and just understanding that's your end goal is something that cities or states just simply don't do or don't fund, or there's no mechanism to accomplish the goal that you're trying to accomplish. And unless you change your city charter, that is against the law. So having many more real conversations about what pragmatically can be done, because so much can actually be done through government if you know how to, understand the craft of the system.
One of the things, Scott, that's striking me, and thanks for that, and even from your multiple perspectives as far as one of these boundary spanners, and thinking about it, same question I've had as far as who's not around the table at the ESHIP summit. It's one of the things I'm watching some of these conferences do, where they do actually have separate days, separate sessions. Like the Global Entrepreneurship Congress with the Global Entrepreneurship Network has the Policymakers Summit. And those policymakers may or may not sit around the big conventions and the big tables, the raw sessions, getting everybody excited, or the building sessions to help build capability, capacity, and ecosystem builders. But it is, it's almost like we need different things for different people to feel comfortable and have their conversation, even within the broader framework. So it's almost like splitting off so we can hear the story you just said around the people who are making some of those decisions. It'd be interesting to have that. I also conscious that Beth said, because we've got about 15 minutes left on this one, also to just talk briefly about the logistics around ESHIP, governance conference attendance, and just the whole conscious of being flights and things like that. So make sure we reserve a bit of time for that.
Is it the governor's conference now, not the mayor's conference?
No, it's a mayor's conference on entrepreneurship, sorry. There are governors talking about workforce ontology with Peter Frico. So if anybody wants to talk about the future of work with Peter, I'm sure that would be an interesting conversation, but that's a whole nother call.
We may have in Idaho, we may have someone representing the governor is actually more interested than our new mayor, who is not a big fan of small business. So she loves entrepreneurs. She hates small business. I haven't quite figured out how that works. is, do we really should be figuring out how we can, get, seduce our elected officials there. But I'm wondering, to Scott's point, who would be, who is the key leverage point from Scott, from your perspective? Who are the people that we would most love to have here? Maybe it's not the mayor, maybe it's not the governor.
So we have a serial entrepreneur who has invested, some of the folks who came out to SEN saw him, but has invested in 53 local startup companies. He would be the kind of person that you would want to put around the table. We also have a Fortune 500 that has invested in numerous ecosystem planning activities, primarily around diversity and inclusion and other social impact initiatives. I would put that person around, a representative there around the table. But the goal being is, how do you learn the values of those individuals, and how do you become a translator to say, look at this example from this community and this person. How do I find this person locally, and how do I create another champion similar to this individual in my hometown? So I think it's just as important to locate them as the reason why they should attend and why they should be invited. Is just as critical. The reality was, for a lot of these really high-level conversations, the difference was I was also integral in them. So you get a different perspective when you've actually, once you've gone through the really hairy fights to get some of this, because I was a policymaker when many of these conversations started.
I just want to say that if we had our global awareness campaign out there running, we wouldn't need to have this conversation.
Well, then we would be having different conversations about who to share that with, or how to share that, or whatever. So logistically, right? So the messaging is something that, so maybe that's the for the next 5 minutes, like, what would your message be to get other people to come to the table? Because at this point in time, you're all the translators, right?
Yeah. So the one other part on this is, for these individuals, there are other reasons why, what are the reasons, what's their impetus for showing up? And, American Family Insurance being one. One way is, because they get to tell a story and share a stage, but they're also looking for best practices. And it sometimes is, all right, how do you group some of these individuals or some of these corporations just so they get to know each other? Because you find there's a lot of folks doing super innovative and interesting things, and they have no idea of the best practices that are happening in someone else's backyard. And I would just continue to go back to that, because that's why conferences, in-person meetings, are still very valuable. And ESHIP has that ability to convene.
Yeah, I like that idea of kind of mapping out the different, what are these different groups that we're talking about? Just kind of giving them a bit of a name and a bit of a focus, and then what are their value propositions? And not necessarily trying to convince them of our value propositions or what we think they are, but really deeply understanding what theirs are. And I think the other thing, again, it's just top of mind because it was just recently with International Women's Day, but watching other movements, watching other broad societal shifts that we see happening. Because this is what we're talking about, is a bit of a shift in thinking, a shift in phenomenon of integrating this particular component of economic diversification into a traditional economic development portfolio and we give it a name called ecosystem building and ESHIP and things like that. But how do we map out these different actors? What communication channels are they already aware of? I think, to Beth's point, if we had a global campaign, I think even that would only engage a certain few. Like, how many Earth Days are there, and how many, broad sustainability initiatives are there? And you still have people that are like, yeah, that's not my thing, and I won't turn out the lights. But something else for them may actually work. And so you know, and it's encouraging that we're having this conversation, and that when we really start saying, well, how do we engage the fringes? You know, I think we have a core that we need to engage, but then once we start having the fringe conversation, that means we're actually making progress on the core. But it'd be interesting to have a conversation around what is that mapping process? Who are these groups? Do we really deeply understanding what their value propositions are? And how would we engage, and how maybe can we learn from other movements that have gone on?
Well, Chad, in sort of the corporate strategy world, there's a lot of attention paid to stakeholder management. There are tools for stakeholder mapping, and it really involves casting your net pretty broadly. You may not realize who might be a stakeholder out there, or that they have a stake in what you're doing, what we're doing. We have a stake in what they're doing. It gets to be a pretty broad list, and it's sometimes very surprisingly easy to find a point of common ground where, you know, we are doing something that would help them. We're not doing anything that would hurt them. But yeah, what you said about seeing it through their eyes is you know, what's the value proposition to them is something. But there are tools and processes for working through it, and I found it to be, at least working with. I've been working on a proposed startup studio here, and it's been very interesting. The potential enemies and potential friends that we found. And the potential friends have more money than the enemies, so you know, this actually could be a good thing. But I would say none of them were the usual suspects. That they were like, why would they care? And then the more you look at it, go, oh, crap, yeah. I think, you know, we could get, if we got really good at you know, stakeholder mapping and analysis, it'd be a huge value to the community as a whole, as well as selfishly for ourselves. It's work, but it's work though, guys.
So what are the steps then, Loris? What comes first? Do we have to map first? Do we have to get a few people at the table first? Like, what comes first?
Well, it is sort of a snowball. It can be sort of a snowball, like a snowball sample. That is the people that you are talking to is say, okay, who else should be, you know, at the table? That whether they're going to love what we're doing or they're going to hate what we're doing, you know, is you know, here I find it, you know, occasionally painful to find out, you know, oh yeah, another mortal enemy. But unless you do that, you don't understand. But is just being mindful, is always thinking that here's an organization. You know, if you have a local sustainability group, you know, like, you know, here one of our great allies is going to be an outfit that's doing its damnedest to turn every company in Boise into a B Corp. Maybe that's not obvious. Maybe that's obvious now. But again, start with the people you know, and ask them, who else should we be talking about, for good, bad, or weird? And a lot of them you'll be like, you can dismiss as or put to the lower priority. But I've been just stunned by, you know, by doing that, by asking people, and people like to be asked. They want to. It makes them feel like they're part of you know, they're an ecosystem builder too. And I think that belongingness is something I know that Celia, you've pushed for, is how do we make them feel, you know, this is a great way to make people feel belonging. But the short answer is start with the people, the stakeholders you know, and just keep asking who else should be at the table.
I think that's a great point. So that's the idea of bringing people together. And you know, when we talk about coming together at the ESHIP Summit, it's what can we only do together, face to face, and hopefully the things around, you know, being face to face with people kind of mellows and lets itself. But it's challenging us, right? To say, okay, this has got to be important. Now, how do you want to invite people? So that's the best thing about the Global Awareness Campaign, and how we put something like that together that resonates. Because working in social justice movements, I will tell you that the research that we've done is one message works for one group of people, and the same message doesn't work for others. So trying to find the languaging that's going to help your cause and not, so then once we map it out with the assets that we have, then coming up with the right wording and then getting the message out there. So it's a very short time, but think about who would you like to have at the table. So I heard obviously policymakers. I've heard funders. Who's currently not at your table, not at our ESHIP table, but that's in your community, that like a segment or a demographic? Who should we have that we're not thinking about? So that's an open question.
Yeah, and Cecilia, I might just caveat on that one then, and also say that I'm not sure that they have to be at my table, just as long as that a table is happening and that they're at it. Because sometimes actually it might be a disservice, or it might not get the outcomes we're after if they are at my table, because I might be having conversations that is at a different conversation level. So as long as we have a table that they're at, and we have those translators or those people that can have that conversation, I think that would be good. But they don't necessarily have to come to mind. And I'll leave it to others to maybe throw in some ideas. But some of the ones you already mentioned, policymakers and funders, and also different geographies, different stages of ecosystems, different, all the roles that we see in an ecosystem. I think they all need to be at a table. I'm just not sure where that table is going to be at.
Mm-hmm. Also understanding who are the key influencers for any one of these individuals becomes critical. So you may have, you may see the facade of, all right, you have a mayor at the table, and the mayor may be learning something, but there's actually someone that mayor is actually going to for advice on small business and entrepreneurship. The higher up you go in an organization, and the more likely you see that type of key player inside a stakeholder group. So when you're talking about Fortune 500 CEOs, they're very rarely making a decision in a vacuum, or a governor making a decision in the vacuum. And it's when you do find one, because you're not going to find there's not a full infinite knowledge base. When you can find one of those individuals, trying to loop them in, because they can do more for a community than probably they even realize. Particularly if they also support and understand ecosystem building.
And sometimes in some of these smaller communities, we see that the entrepreneurs themselves are really good connectors and ecosystem builders, and for them to bring back the information and share it with others seems to be beneficial.
I mean, we always we talk about mayors a lot, but are we thinking about city managers as well? Because depending on what community you're in, city manager wields more power than the mayor.
Exactly, and I've, our county executive is responsible for the whole county of 250,000 people, where our mayor is responsible for a population of under 100,000. So same thing here.
Yeah, I love Scott's point as far as who are the influencers, because quite often you can get the mayor there, but the mayor's going off to cut the ribbon on some cafe, and then going off to like 3 or 4 words of that mayor can have a significant influence, but they're influencing over so much. Whereas the person that influenced the mayor to point them in a certain direction, I think is pretty valuable. So I like that. The city managers, the county executives, the other ones who kind of fought their way into a certain position based on their capacity to do exactly what we're talking about doing.
Yeah, there was my mentor in grad school had consulted the city of Chicago, and was Mayor Harold Washington, who was most known for, one, he drank a lot, but that was normal because it was Chicago, and that he didn't get along with his own party, but he asked what he could do to, grow the community. And my boss sort of glibly threw out, just go to every ribbon cutting, every new business, every expansion, everything, just spend your whole day going to these events. And it was staggering how quickly economic activity suddenly started ramping up in the inner city in Chicago. And whether that was causal or not, who knows? But it was striking that that it had an impact. And if the influencer is an outside consultant, that's kind of hard to replicate. But I will bet that the mayor's political aides probably had nudged him. That if we can figure out who is the one whispering in the mayor or the governor's shell-like ear, that might be very helpful, because some might be allies and some might become allies. And I'm just thinking here in Idaho, there are the people that the governor listens to probably are the wrong people, but the mayors might be listening to very much the right people. So I already made notes to go after that.
That's good.
We have a wrap, Chad?
Yeah, I'm just conscious of time. So is there anything that we need to talk about as far as logistics and things like that before we wrap up? We got about 30 seconds left.
Yeah, I mean, I was just with my county executive, and she's concerned about getting her flights, and she did pre-register, but the question is, is Kaufman covering the expenses for the mayor's conference attendees again, and how does all that work? And I know that there might not be answers yet, but with all that's going on across the globe, with the virus and all, I think if we could get more information sooner than later, that'd be great.
Okay, so the pre-registration, as Beth mentioned, for the mayors and the senior staff that have already been to a mayor's conference on entrepreneurship, that registration is currently open, and they're pre-registering. Anybody who works for a mayor or senior mayoral staff or interested in the mayor's conference, that will be open in another, I'm going to say roughly about a week or two, within the next few days. I'm hoping within the next dozen days that will be open to the people that have not attended before. As far as the ESHIP Summit goes, there will be pre-registration again for the people that have come in the past. We are looking very seriously at the delegation model about coming together as a community. So think about who you would like to invite. We are beta testing a mapping tool to try to connect people in communities that may not know each other to come as a delegation, or to think about where people are seeking delegations. So while the ESHIP champions are beta testing the map, hopefully in the next couple of days, that we would be able to give feedback to Wellington and the building team to figure out how to work that into the registration. So that's what we're working on. So again, the whole idea is you can't build an ecosystem by yourself. So figure out who your teammates are going to be. It may be the person who you keep butting up against to maybe have a shared experience. Think about how to do it together, because you gotta live with each other. So that's the invitation. And as soon as we get things more firmly in place, obviously that comes out. So it's in the works, and everything should be coming out. As far as travel arrangements, Beth, for them, that would be a question for Evan's team and the team that builds out the mayor's conference. So there's an email contact at the bottom of the registration. They should reach out to them. Everything, as far as I know at this time, is just as it has been for the past couple of years, with the exception of this idea of bringing together a delegation. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any other questions?
No, I think that's good. I think with that in mind, Beth, did you have anything more on the logistics or anything like that, or should we wrap this up?
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks.
All right, cool. Well, thanks everyone, and thanks Cecilia for initiating this and kind of sticking around through the drive. Great conversation. I think from here we can probably wrap up a few notes. I took a few that we can add to the. Do we have a Google Doc for this? Maybe we can send that through in Slack or something.
So yeah, so it should be a running agenda from the other calls, but there's the sheet that has some takeaways. So if you could jot down some takeaways and some resources and things, that would be great. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody. Have a fantastic day, morning, evening, whatever it is for you, and we'll look forward to the next call. And I think some good progress here on kind of maybe mapping a bit of the stakeholders, seeing who the influences are, and how do we either get people around the table or even maybe making sure that we have other tables that are appropriate for them and the conversations they can have. But thanks, and have a great one.
Take care.
Thanks.
Good call.